Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Empowered Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Monos. Today, we have a very special guest, Mike Carroll. He's a golf strength and conditioning coach. I've been excited to have him on the podcast, hoping to get him on the podcast for a while now because, one, he was very helpful to me early in my career. My business is about 5 years old. Early on, I was asking him for advice because he just does a great job with strength and conditioning and personal training in general. But I also work with a lot of golfers, and so he gave me a lot of advice there. He has an app. I use the app. It's great. So I recommend it. But Mike, if you want to give a quick introduction on your background, how did you get into strength and conditioning and what's your athletic background?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on, Matthew.
Mhm.
I got into strength and conditioning mainly through my older brother. He
Mhm.
went to college 4 years ahead of me and did sports and exercise science. And while he was doing that, I got pretty interested in the things he was learning. I grew up in a very kind of active sporting household. Yeah, and as soon as I started doing that, I knew that strength and conditioning was the pathway I'd like to go down afterwards.
Mhm.
Some people do sports psychology, others do biomechanics, some go
Mhm.
into kind of physiology research and that kind of thing. But I knew that kind of how training can influence sporting performance is what I was most interested in. Um, and pretty much as soon as I started in college, I started working in my local gym where I had been a member for a few years previous. So right away, I was able to get some nice experience writing programs, training clients, and things like that. So for a few years, I was just working as a personal trainer and strength and conditioning coach for a variety of sports. And I'd played golf as a teenager, and I just was very interested in how we could maybe use training to influence what was going on in the swing. I hit the ball further, reduce injury risk, and there was very little strength and conditioning for golf kind of being done. I saw it as a big sort of hole in the golf market. So I did the TPI level 1 certification. I think that was probably in 2014. After that, I started using the brand name Fit for Golf to sort of market my services more towards golfers. And in 2016, I took a job in Irvine, California, in a place called Hanson Fitness for Golf. So I moved from Cork, Ireland to California. Around the same time, I set up the Fit for Golf app. For 4 years from 2016 to 2020, I kind of balanced working in Hanson Fitness and selling programs through the app on the side. And then in 2020, I went full time with the Fit for Golf app and started getting some interest from PGA Tour players. So my work then was kind of split running the app for the everyday golfer
Mhm.
and doing some work in person with PGA Tour players sort of from time to time. And that's been the case since 2020.
The one thing that I think is particularly impressive is it's a difficult thing, one, to have a successful career in this field across any sport or with online as well. But then with golf in particular, I think it's growing golf performance, but for a long time, people didn't really associate proper strength and conditioning, especially the way that you do it. I think people think a lot of, you know, banded exercises and, not stressing the tissues that much. We'll do heavy compound movements. I see you doing squats, deadlifts, lunges, bench pressing, overhead pressing, all these very like traditional S&C sort of movements and applying it to golfers. And I saw you made this post maybe a few years ago where you're talking about everybody says it's all about the short game to get the edge. You're talking about if you can just add, I don't know, 30 yards to your drive and get to the green that much sooner, it gives you another dimension to your game. And so that can apply to other people. I work with quite a few golfers, and then my parents as well, but who are golfers, and it's tremendous the difference getting their deadlift to go from 40-pound kettlebell to 225, 275 does to hitting the ball further as opposed to super niche specific exercises. Could you speak to the demands of golf from a performance perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So, as strength and conditioning coaches, the main areas we're really going to be able to help someone with their golf is how far they're able to drive the ball or how close they're able to drive the ball to the green, reducing the likelihood that they get injured from their
Mhm.
golf practice and play. Like golf is interesting in that like it's a very, very precise skill sport. Like
Mhm.
there's skills that are very important to the ultimate level you play at, which are completely separate to physical conditioning. And they're all very important depending on the level of golf you want to get to. Where the kind of physical training side of it becomes, I think, like very important and very interesting. There's mainly two ways. Like for people who are looking for a competitive edge, improving our physical capabilities can drastically transform how far you can hit the ball, both with your tee shots and with your each club in the bag. So you can drive it closer to the green, and then you can use a shorter approach club from each distance. So that makes a big difference. And then the other one for people who are kind of, let's say, enthusiastic recreational golfers is that golf tends to get much, much harder for people as they get a little bit older, as they go through their sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, as they lose strength, power, and mobility, their golf swing tends to change a lot as a result. They don't generate anywhere near as much club head speed. The ball goes much shorter, much lower. It gets very difficult to reach greens in regulation, and scores tend to go up.
Mhm,
This is a time when a lot of golfers start to lose enjoyment in the game.
mhm,
And then it's also a time when a lot of golfers start to struggle with injuries and orthopedic issues, whether it's knees, hips, shoulders, backs.
mhm,
And there's no doubt that staying on top of your physical training helps slow the decline of this a little bit and can make golf a lot more enjoyable for a lot longer. So
mhm,
you kind of have the short term or medium term of definitely improved performance, and then probably adding years of high quality golf
mhm.
to your golfing career as well.
I think, people don't take the demands of golf seriously enough in the context that maybe you've dealt with this, but some of my clients may have some back issues or shoulder issues or something like that here and there, and they'll still golf and they'll still try to swing for the fences, and then they're, like, saying, "Oh, maybe I won't do this exercise," where you can actually scale, the intensity within the weight room very gradually, but then in golf, they're still gonna swing 100 miles an hour trying to crank the
Yeah,
ball and all that stuff, yeah.
definitely. That's a kind of common, I think, amongst a
Mhm,
lot of people. Like there is no way to swing a golf club with any sort of speed at all that isn't
mhm,
stressful on the
mhm,
body. I think people, think the golf club is light compared to lifting, potentially heavy weights, and they think that, one must be far more stressful than the other. But when we consider the forces involved
mhm,
rather than just the weight of the club or the weight of the
mhm,
implement you're lifting, yeah, there's no doubt that the golf swing puts significant stress on a number of parts of our body, the spine
mhm,
being one of them. Yeah, it's much more likely that someone's gonna run into some, whether it's a soft tissue strain or tweaking something in their lower back, or
mhm,
just a gradual onset of pain from sort of an overuse style of symptoms
mhm.
from a lot of golf practice and play versus some lifting in the gym, provided it's of an appropriate scale, as you said.
There's a big thing in the golf world about, like, golf-specific exercises, and their place in a program. I'm not saying that they don't exist. I've seen you, for example, use your flywheel, and put it at the highest setting and then set it up behind you and do the top half of the rotation to drive extra mobility, which I think is a really clever thing. But then some people might overemphasize drills like that and then not do the basic qualities like you're talking about, squatting, hinging, lunging, and pushing, pulling, just general core strength, rotation, and all that stuff. What is, like, the balance that you think is worthwhile? How much stock would you invest into more special exercises?
Yeah, the problem that people run into when they do this is that if they get caught up in only doing exercises that resemble the golf swing, they forget about the necessity to provide any sort of stress or overload to the system to develop
Mhm,
a physical quality. So people might use a weighted implement or band in the gym to try and recreate some aspect of the swing and
mhm,
potentially do it in a way that's working on their technique. And I think it tends to kind of not give them a good return on their training time for two main ways, or for two main reasons. The first one is they're not doing anything that's stressful enough to
mhm,
create physical adaptations. So they're
mhm,
not really getting more mobile, they're not getting stronger, they're not getting more powerful. But then the other one is that while they think they're working on their golf swing, it's just really not specific enough to transfer to the swing at
mhm,
all. Like how we swing is so entrenched in our nervous system from years and years of swinging and having a consequence to those shots.
mhm,
We tend to move in a pattern like that's directly linked to how we've hit the ball in the past and the types of shots that we don't want to see. And there's just, in my experience, very little transfer from practicing what feels like a golf movement in the gym to then trying to make that movement with a golf club,
mhm,
hitting a golf ball, and with the consequence of the shot. So people kind of get stuck in this gray area where, yeah, fair enough, they're doing some moving around that's good for them, but they're not developing their physical qualities and they're not improving their technique. So
mhm,
rather than trying to merge their basically like golf practice and their physical training, they'd
Mhm.
actually be better off looking at them as completely separate training elements for the most part. And they
Mhm.
should use their training time to improve their physical capabilities. And the two big ones that people should be focusing on are mobility and strength.
Mhm. Mhm.
Some power or explosive style activities are also important, but for the vast majority of people, their explosiveness is going to get a lot better simply just from getting stronger and being able
Mhm.
to move through better ranges of motion. And then they should use their practice time with a golf club in hand for definite, and ideally with a golf ball present to work on their technique. And this way
Mhm.
they can isolate the two main things that we're working on, our physical capabilities and our golf technique, rather than running into the very common problem of getting stuck in the middle with what look like golf specific exercises, but they're really not doing anything for our physical capabilities and they're
Mhm.
not really doing anything for our golf technique. Where
Mhm.
they actually might have some merit is in a dynamic warm up routine,
Mhm.
because it is giving us a chance to get our body temperature up. We are working our body through ranges that we might do in the swing, and doing it for 5 or 10 minutes before we play might be a good way to prep for playing, but it definitely
Mhm.
shouldn't be considered like your training program.
Mhm. I think the other thing too is that people forget about the stimulus of sport practice itself and not just weight room. So if you go and you try to work on club head speed at the driving range for an hour, that's about as specific as you can get. But it is also applying high velocities and a high stimulus to your body, as opposed to. I'm not saying med ball throws are bad; they can definitely be valuable. But if you just do that and then you never actually practice your technique, or you don't think about the stimulus that's applied to your body from technical practice, I think that's kind of a missed opportunity, or like to think about it. I think people don't think about that enough.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's like when you're trying to weigh up a person's training program, especially if
Mhm.
club head speed is something that they're interested in,
Mhm.
like sort of swing speed training or hitting balls with your driver, trying to get the speed up, that almost like intersects, well, it does intersect physical training and
Mhm.
golf practice, because it's
Mhm.
it's both. And you need to account for it in your programming for each of them. So if somebody is doing a reasonably high level of speed training, whether it's
Mhm.
with their driver or with one of the popular speed training systems like the Stack or something like that, well, you should be taking that into consideration when you're drawing up their programming for their physical
Mhm.
training. Because if someone is already doing a reasonably high level of high speed swings in a week, well, then they should probably use their training time to target the adaptations they're not getting from that.
Mhm.
So, like you mentioned, kind of, medicine ball throws and slams and things like that, they would be a reasonably similar stimulus to
Mhm.
swinging the stack or your driver.
Mhm.
So, doing more of them probably wouldn't be as beneficial as doing things that allow us to stimulate the important adaptations in our big muscle groups, like motor unit recruitment and
Mhm.
muscle size of the fast twitch fibers, that we can get from a more traditional strength training routine. So if you
Mhm.
can combine these, I would call them like raw or global adaptations from your strength training that fundamentally change how our body works and how much force it can produce, and then learn how to apply it to the sporting skill through practice of
Mhm.
swinging the club or one of your speed training tools, that covers the vast majority of people's training needs. Like where special exercises or exercises that are very similar in nature to the sporting event became popular, it was really in track and field.
Mhm.
And what we need to remember here is that these athletes are generally training for Olympic Games. They're
Mhm.
international level athletes. They're trying to get as close as they can to their physical potential in this sporting activity. They
Mhm.
probably have a decade or two of solid training already
Mhm.
behind them, and they're really trying to refine the last little bit of output they can get in their movement. Whereas most vast, overwhelming majority of people we deal with are nowhere near this level. So
Mhm.
they're actually not getting the benefit from these exercises that the more advanced athletes they were created for would, and they'd
Mhm.
actually be far better off by trying to improve their general physiology.
Almost like a general physical preparation is good for general people and special exercises for special athletes.
Yeah, and the thing I'd put on top of that too, like, is that you actually already are doing special exercises
Mhm.
to a certain extent with any type of swing speed training you're
Mhm.
doing with like if you're swinging the stack or something like that is a special exercise
Mhm.
in golf that, someone who throws the hammer or the javelin in track and field might
Mhm.
do with a lighter or heavier javelin or a
Sure.
similar tool in a similar movement pattern, similar velocity. Like that's
Uh-huh.
what we're getting with our over and underload tools in speed training,
Mhm.
or simply just trying to swing the driver faster than we normally do, because that fundamentally changes it as an exercise.
When you say the stack, do you mean those speed sticks that have, like, the weights on the end of them? It's almost like a golf club, is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
Yeah.
The
Gotcha.
stack and the speed sticks would be two of the more popular ones. The stack is one shaft. You get interchangeable weights that can be put
Okay,
on or off the end. And then speed sticks is three different sticks of three different
okay.
weights.
And you find value in that because is it the concept of just, like, the force velocity curve? Is it contrast training? Do you do contrast training with it?
It's exactly so. I would say it's more the force velocity
Gotcha.
curve. Like an interesting one to dive into. There's definitely like force velocity, or let's say it's really load velocity
Mhm,
characteristics to you swinging something that's slightly heavier than
mhm,
what your standard club is, and swinging something lighter. So
mhm,
swinging something heavier to develop a bit more force and strength capability, swinging something lighter to force you to get used to moving in the movement pattern a little bit faster,
mhm,
hopefully get the muscles better at contracting more quickly. But there's also actually motor learning elements in terms of when you're swinging heavier and lighter things with the goal of making them move faster.
mhm,
They both do different things to our mechanics to try and help us basically improve our technique. For example, the heavier ones almost force people to use the bigger muscles in their body a little bit better, potentially
mhm.
use their legs and trunk more, because you can't really cheat or overpower the heavier
Interesting.
ones. And then with the lighter ones, people almost tend to get better with their wrist mechanics and how they're getting, like the golf term would be almost like lag or wrist angle,
Mhm,
creating some of that and letting it go at the right time. The other thing they do really well is it gives people a radar for feedback.
sure.
They remove the ball and it gets them concentrating on trying to develop
Speed.
more speed and athletic motion, because the consequence of hitting a bad shot has been removed.
Would you describe to somebody who doesn't understand, like, what you're talking about with the heavier clubs? I find the exercise where heavier weight can actually make people perform better is kettlebell swings. If you give somebody a 10-pound kettlebell, you see a lot of, like, squat and shoulder raises, but if you give them a heavy enough one that they have to use the hips to generate power, then they actually get to see it looks like pushing a child on a swing. Would you say it's similar to that? Where you can't cheat
Yeah,
it, so you have to.
so like it's still a reasonably light
Mhm,
implement. Like you're still
sure.
well able to swing it, but it does feel different for sure
Mhm,
relative to a normal driver.
mhm,
And yeah, when it's heavier, people tend to move in a movement pattern that doesn't rely on, I would say, their wrists and hands and arms as much. They tend to swing with a slightly slower tempo, give
mhm,
themselves more time to load up their trunk and their legs and then
mhm,
unwind. Whereas with the lighter ones, you can almost get away with feeling like you use your hands and wrists a lot. And like both of these strategies are important, and each of them gives you like an opportunity to almost practice one versus the other, and then it can get a little bit more specific. Whereas if a player relatively is very good with the heavy
mhm,
ones but very poor with the light ones, well, then it's a sign that maybe they need more practice with these light ones and
mhm.
work on the mechanics and potentially physiology that these tend to impact a little bit more.
Interesting. The other thing I was gonna ask too is I don't know the weights for the different implements, but would you say the heaviest one kind of has the ability with the increased momentum on the, upswing to help with additional, like, mobility? Does it have
Yeah,
enough?
yeah, definitely. Like I think it's going to be because there's more load, and you
Mhm,
tend to swing it in a way where you give yourself more time to accelerate it, because it's
mhm,
more difficult to accelerate. You'll probably make a bigger turn sort of
mhm,
organically anyway, which can be good. And I think just speed training in general tends to be good for people's mobility, because when they're less, if the ball is removed or if they're using a ball but they're not focusing on the they tend to be more comfortable in making a bigger turn rather than
mhm.
constraining themselves to a smaller swing in the hopes of making better contact.
It's also the thing where, it's interesting how just adding an implement can help people with mobility. You've seen clips, I'm sure, of, like, Olympic level weightlifters who can do overhead squats phenomenally when they have hundreds of pounds, in their hands, but then if they do, like, an FMS, they might get a 2 on the overhead squat
Yeah,
assessments.
exactly. Which would be probably a topic for another podcast, but would make you
Sure.
question the validity of the screening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yeah, sorry, I forgot where we were going there, but
So, to go in a slightly different direction, I wanted to talk about, I don't like the term injury prevention. Some people sell that as like a you can prevent injuries, and I think that's where it gets a little unethical. So injury reduction, if we prefer that term. But what would you say are like the common injury sites or areas of focus that you tend to put a lot of stock into when it comes to keeping people healthy for golf over a long competitive season, for example?
Yeah, so when I'm making programs, to be perfectly honest,
Mm,
I'm not really honing in on any particular area and thinking we need to do more here because this
mhm,
is where people tend to get injured. Because what you need to be careful with there too is that it would be very easy to do too much.
mhm,
And then you're dealing with the same overload issue that
mhm,
people may have from their golf practice. So I just try and provide a pretty well-rounded program that works on mobility and strength in the
mhm,
major muscle groups of the body. Perfectly honest, we use them all a lot in the golf
mhm,
swing. Like all of the like it's a full body athletic motion. So there's a lot of areas that come under strain. But for definite, like the big ones I would say where golfers tend to run into issues are the lower back for sure.
mhm,
That's probably the biggest one. The shoulder, the elbow, the wrist
mhm,
are common from like a kind of overuse. Overuse is a poor term too, like for people who kind of aren't familiar, but that would be more, I would say, like an overload issue where
mhm,
people's volume of practice and play, basically the stress they're applying, is greater than what they can currently tolerate. So those would be classic examples of things that tend to flare up in golfers if they get more enthusiastic about their practice and play and
mhm,
suddenly begin to practice and play a lot more. But I would say they're really the big ones, like the lower back, the
mhm,
shoulder, the wrist, and elbow.
mhm,
You'd sometimes get kind of hip, knee, neck, but I would
mhm.
say not as common. I think the lower back is probably by far and away the most common one for the recreational golfer, especially one that's kind of like most impactful on their ability to play and practice, I'd say.
Mhm,
People that have maybe like a golfer's or tennis elbow or sort of wrist tendonitis, that can be very debilitating at times. But when you're dealing with solely just like a tissue issue, it's often easy enough to work around and you can kind of
mhm.
modify the loading and things like that. But like if people are having a lot of trouble with their lower back, that's something that tends to make practice like almost impossible to a certain extent, I'd say.
Yeah, I've always felt that, it's not the most scientific thing in the world, but I always felt that proximal injuries are more debilitating than distal injuries. So I'd much rather have, a pinky injury than a wrist. I'd rather have wrist and elbow, elbow to shoulder, shoulder to, like, spine or something like that.
Yeah, for definite.
Sure. I was gonna ask as well, you're talking about mobility quite a bit. What are the, like, main things people should focus on for golf mobility?
Yeah, so if you just think of what happens in a golf swing, if we go through kind of the different stages, so
Mhm,
we have the setup or the address position, which
mhm,
is pretty easy to get into. Like it doesn't
mhm,
require any kind of special mobility.
mhm,
And then we have the backswing, where
mhm,
the pelvis and the torso or the rib cage go through a lot of rotation. So ideally, we have good mobility in our hips that they're
mhm,
able to rotate. We have good mobility in our thoracic spine or our mid
mhm,
back that can also rotate. And then the kind of two other big ones I would say are, especially on our lead side, at the front of our body, would be our shoulder. We want to be
mhm,
able to go through decent shoulder flexion. So that's just raising your arm overhead for people who don't know on the
mhm,
lead arm. And then it's important, but probably not as big a player as the hips, the T spine, and the shoulder. It would actually be the neck or cervical mobility
mhm,
because we want to be able to keep our best, definitely the ball like in our eyesight. And
mhm,
when we turn our shoulders a lot in the backswing,
mhm,
if our neck isn't mobile, we'll tend to move our head with our spine and then the ball's kind of out of our vision, which probably isn't ideal. But they're the big ones. I would say the hips, the mid back, and the shoulders. If
mhm,
you can keep those mobile, you'll probably be in a pretty good spot. And then what is also important, but I think it's usually a bit harder to modify, you definitely do need a certain range of motion in your wrists to
mhm,
be able to get the club and the club face into the right positions. That's something that like I think is usually okay in people unless they've maybe had like a fall or they've had a sports injury where they've like
yeah, an injury.
broken a wrist or had something inserted. But like if you can't, let's say, flex and extend or
Mhm,
bow and arch your left wrist, or if you can't hinge down and up with your right wrist
mhm,
at all, like that's gonna make things tricky. But for the most part, like people are okay there, and you can even do things kind of with how you hold the club and use your hands and
mhm.
fingers to counteract that a little bit.
I find that, I've been able to help a lot of my clients with low back pain, and, part of it is initially teaching them that, like how to brace properly for certain exercises. So yeah, we can do a lot of like anti-core stuff, a lot of your front plank, side planks, your anti-rotation presses and stuff like that, while also trying to increase mobility at the hips and thoracic spine. So it puts less demand on specifically the low back. But then eventually I also believe in building tolerance with movement. So a lot of like legitimate flexion, extension, rotation, and lateral flexion. It sounds like that's one of the things that helps people is yes, strength helps with the capacity like you're talking about, also volume. But then also imagine you may have seen similar things where if you get people to have very mobile hips and very mobile spines, that puts a little bit less stress on the spine, which is what you see with people when they get fusions, for example, is the joints above or below start to degrade quicker because there's a lot more demand on them.
Yeah, definitely. Like look at kind of trunk or core
Mhm,
training if we're talking about say like the pelvis, the hips, the lower back. Like to be honest, very, very simply, I just try and think about one, what movements those
mhm,
areas can do. Like obviously we can bend forwards and backwards, we can bend side to side, and
mhm,
we can rotate.
mhm,
We can do some of those movements combined. And that's what tends to happen in the golf swing. So I think it's a good idea for people to basically develop some strength and mobility in all of these ranges. Because if you can do that, you're going to be much better prepared to deal with the demands of the golf swing for sure. It's one of those ones where if somebody doesn't have an issue and they do it pretty well in their golf swing, well, then their golf swing is going to do a reasonably good idea or a good job of maintaining the mobility that they need. But they're definitely going to be doing it in a way that they're going to be primarily stressing like certain aspects over others. Not a case of that there shouldn't be any imbalances. I think that's going to be normal if you play a sport as kind of uh uniform in terms of one movement pattern as golf. But I think if you can strengthen and improve mobility in those movements,
mhm,
you're gonna have, thicker, stronger muscle fibers, active tissue. You're not going to be working as close to end range of motion when you're
mhm.
swinging because you've improved your range of motion. I think it's a no-brainer that you're going to feel better when you're swinging.
Mhm. I was, talking to one of my friends, earlier today about this. I was telling him that you were gonna be on the podcast, and, he was asking what you can do to help somebody with golf, in terms of, sports performance. And I almost tried to you're talking about the uniformity of movement, that there's not a lot of movement diversity as opposed to, I'll say jujitsu for lack of better words. You see a lot of stuff happening. And I was almost trying to describe if you're trying to help, David Ortiz, the batter in, baseball to train, to be able to hit bombs and all that stuff. Yes, the technique is different, but I guess in concept, the general training is gonna be very similar. We have to train for rotation, you have to train for mobility in that sense, strength and power. The broader the base, the taller the pyramid can be. And how golf has gotten so athletic now, you have people that can hit the ball in the upper 300s pretty consistently, pretty accurately, and all that stuff. I think it's pretty remarkable. I think golf has gotten more athletic. The years of the John Daly are moving on a little bit, and the years of the Tiger Woods being very professional has certainly changed. And so I was just trying to explain to him how I guess the game is evolving.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's kind of two things there I touch on. I'm not like a baseball guy at all from
Mhm,
growing up in Ireland, but I would actually argue that there's more room to increase club head speed via mechanics in golf than there is in
uh-huh,
baseball.
uh-huh,
Because in golf, the ball's not moving and we
uh-huh,
can take as long as we want to hit it, which
uh-huh.
gives us way more options for what we do in our swing. Whereas in baseball, our time frame from,
Yeah,
like ball leaving hand to us needing to
uh-huh,
make contact
uh-huh,
is obviously very short. It's not a case of like the batter can do whatever they want
mhm,
to generate the most speed possible because if
mhm.
that takes too long,
Sure.
they're going to have missed the ball. Like I
Mhm,
don't know this, but like I'm sure if you measure these hitters' maximum bat speed,
mhm,
where there's a ball, say, just teed up and they get to step and hit it as hard as they can,
mhm,
versus them hitting balls that are thrown at them.
mhm,
Like, I don't know if there's a discrepancy there. I would guess there is because they have to
mhm,
reduce the time they have to swing when they're reacting to the pitch. But in golf, like, one of the most simple ways for people to increase their club head speed
mhm.
is to get their hands to travel further in the backswing, which means
Okay.
that it tends to take longer, which
Mhm,
isn't a luxury you have in baseball. And then
mhm.
the other one is like the John Daly example. John Daly, like, I think was a pretty good football player in high
Okay.
school up until his young college days
Mhm.
and was actually very, very athletic without working on it or really looking after himself. So
Okay.
even though like he's not a poster child for say S&C
Mhm,
and physical training, like he was exceptionally good
mhm,
athletically. He was
mhm,
just one of those people that didn't really have to work too hard at it. But at the same time, he was probably doing a lot of athletics from a young age to his late teens, and was actually an incredibly hard practicer too. So like, yeah, he liked, some other things that we probably wouldn't advise, but the reason he could swing the way he did, there's no faking that.
I guess that speaks to, long-term athletic development and, kind of going against early sports specialization, and then just being a good general athlete overall, which is why I think, my current sport, I was a soccer player. I like to say football, but I have an American audience, so soccer. I was a soccer player for the majority of my life, but then after graduating college, I had a little bit of time where I wasn't training for anything specifically, just general weight room stuff, and then I thought I need to pick up a sport so that I can, have, like, purpose behind the decisions I'm making in the gym and a little bit more intent behind the actual exercises. So, my wife got pregnant about a year ago, and, I wanted to get some self-defense skills. I'm not a huge guy, and I thought jujitsu would be, like, a fun thing to do and, a little bit of Muay Thai and stuff like that. Totally different. I make the joke that, like, soccer players spend a lot of time on the ground, but it doesn't translate um, to jujitsu,
I
but,
wouldn't
like,
think
I could do
so.
your program today, and I feel like it would still be beneficial because of the general principles that you apply to it. There's still gonna be a lot of movements that I do. You do squatting, hitting, pushing, pulling, you do a lot of core work, and then it's not like getting hip rotation or thoracic rotation would be bad for someone who gets folded into a pretzel. So that's what I like is that, like, I think a good strength coach can train multiple sports. Maybe 80, 90% of programs would look nearly identical. And it's maybe the last 10%, which could be conditioning or mobility demands or key injury sites, that would be taken into consideration is where you see kind of the differences from program to program.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with, let's say, recreational level
Mhm,
sports. It changes a little bit if you're talking about someone who's, getting ready for the UFC or for the PGA Tour. That's a little bit different than someone who's just doing it recreationally. Like
mhm,
a way that I tried to explain this to people, and I wrote a kind of long article on it recently, is that for the most part, our strength training should be focused on promoting strength adaptations,
mhm,
because it's the adaptations we create from our training stress are what change our physical
mhm,
capabilities, and they'll show up in any type of force based or
mhm,
athletic task that we're doing. And I think for the vast majority of people, the two big ones, as I mentioned, are increased motor unit recruitment. So the ability to tap into and use more of the muscle fibers we already have. And it's the biggest, strongest ones are the hardest ones to tap into, because we force ourselves to do this when we're strength training. We get better at using these muscle fibers, and that adaptation of your brain sending the muscle through your nervous system to these big, strong fibers in your quads, your glutes, your trunk, your
mhm,
shoulders. It doesn't matter if we get better at doing that from squatting and bench pressing or pushing a Jeep up a hill and throwing rocks.
mhm,
Like, that transfers to whatever task we're doing.
mhm,
And then the other one is increasing the size or cross sectional area of the fast twitch muscle fibers. If we can do both of those things with our strength training, which does happen as long as it's consistent and progressive, like, your body's capabilities are going to be fundamentally changed from a
mhm,
force production standpoint. Now,
mhm,
you will get way more benefit from that training if you're also practicing your sports skill
mhm,
at the same time, because you're constantly learning how to coordinate these new physical capabilities into the physical task. So,
mhm,
if you take jujitsu as an example, something I have no experience in, but if you take someone who is new to jujitsu and they get 30% stronger in their major muscle groups, they're
mhm,
going to be better at jujitsu right
mhm,
away. If you take someone who only has done this training and never takes jujitsu, well, then when they go to jujitsu training, they're probably going to find they don't really know what they're doing with the different movements and skills. So
mhm,
they might not feel like their strength shows up very well. But you
mhm.
can be sure that as they become more competent in their jujitsu, they'll benefit from the strength they've developed. And on the flip
Yeah.
side, you could have someone who's never trained any strength at all and they're a jujitsu master. Well, they'll be, very impressive for most people with their jujitsu skills. But you can be sure that if they were getting stronger on top of their
Mhm,
masterful jujitsu, they would also be better, because I'm sure if you look at the top jujitsu
mhm,
practitioners in the world, like almost any other sport, I'm sure they're a combination of very, very strong physically
mhm,
and very good at jujitsu. It's not
mhm,
just one or the other. And that's the same with kind of any, high level output to a certain extent based sport
mhm.
that you want to talk about. And jujitsu is even, I would say, a high level skill sport, but
Yeah, very much.
it to a certain extent, it probably doesn't matter if you don't have the prerequisite strength. And
Mhm,
that's why they have weight classes. and
Mhm,
why the really good 150-pound jiu-jitsu
mhm.
competitor doesn't compete against the really good 225-pound jiu-jitsu
Mhm.
competitor.
Yeah, they have, like, very rare exceptions where it's, like, the open weight classes, but even then, like, people like to say in the world of jiu-jitsu specifically, like, "Oh, it's a little man's game, it's where you can be smaller and beat bigger people." But in that context, it's more for, like, a smaller trained person against a bigger untrained
Yeah,
person.
exactly.
You're 2
Of
people of
course.
the same skill, and you have yeah, so that's just, like, the best way to look at it. I almost think of, skill versus physical capacity, the same way I almost look at, like, if you're trying to improve your power, it's force and velocity, so you can think increase your strength and then increase your speed. If you don't increase your strength, but you get faster, you're more powerful. You don't increase your speed, but you get stronger, you're more powerful. If you increase both, why not? Right? That's going to do lots of like good things for you. It's the same thing as an athlete. Why not improve the physical side of things and the technical side of things,
Yeah.
as opposed to only prioritizing one thing? Yeah, if you're uh, the strongest person in the world, but you can't make contact with the ball, or you just shank it every single time,
Yeah.
what's the point? And then if you're super technical, but the ball,
Doesn't go
doesn't
anywhere.
touch 200 yards or anything like that, what's the point of that
Yes,
as well?
exactly. Yeah, that's 100% right.
So then another question I wanted to ask you was, so we were talking about mobility, speed, power, strength. We talked about injury reduction. The other things I've seen you post about is cardio and nutrition for golf. And I think part of it is also working with general population. I think my favorite testimonial I've ever seen was you had somebody on Fit for Golf app who was maybe 70 and he was able to do like box jumps and
Oh,
deadlifts, big
yeah,
weight. And
that's Paul Brumley is his name, yeah. He's like
yeah, it's
7
incredible.
years on the app. He's got about 1,500 workouts logged.
Cool. But so that's something that I love is, yes, like, high level sport is great. You can argue the amount of influence a strength coach can have on an already high level athlete, versus the influence you have on a man who's in his 70s, for example, like, regaining superpowers. What can we transition speak to that first, and then maybe we can go back to cardio nutrition?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the most kind of disappointing, let's say, just general things in society when people view their physical capabilities, their health, their fitness, is that they think once you get to a certain age that
Mhm,
decline is inevitable, or that they've
mhm,
gotten too old to reverse it and make progress. And I think one of the places this comes from is from people watching like pro sports and
mhm,
athletes declining in, say, their, let's say, or
mhm,
early 50s. Like, yeah, of course, like someone who's been training like to be a professional for 25 years will start to slowly fall from their peak at around this time.
mhm,
But that's much different to someone who might be 55 or 65 and hasn't been training for 10 or 20 years,
mhm,
because their rate of decline has far more to do with their, lack of activity and
mhm,
training versus just the natural decline due to them getting older. Like, people can make huge improvements in their physical function in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even their 80s and 90s, to be honest,
mhm,
just by implementing some good training strategies. And I think it's refreshing for people to know that they can still make progress even when it's what might have been once considered like too late or gone too
mhm,
far. Yeah, and like Paul, the guy on the testimonials that you're talking about, is a good
mhm.
example of that. Like, I think when he started, he was in his early 70s. He's now 81.
Wow.
But like, he lost about 60 pounds, came off a lot of, different medications he was on for his health, improved his golf game a lot, and
Mhm,
yeah, more importantly, was just a much healthier, fitter, stronger, more
mhm,
able person. And, he's also someone like who has had both his rotator cuffs repaired. He has either one or two artificial hips. So, it's
mhm,
not like he was coming from, someone who'd been doing, let's say, a perfect like fitness program for 30
mhm,
years previous, just an example of someone who kind of made big changes well into their 70s and, is arguably, or I would say almost unarguably, like in better shape at 80 than 70, which
mhm,
not many people can say, but
mhm,
it's just kind of a testament to how powerful, good lifestyle and exercise habits can be at any age,
mhm.
basically.
2 things based off that. One of them is, have you ever seen, like, the docuseries on Netflix? It's, something about the blue zones, but talks about, like, longevity and all this
I
advanced
haven't seen it, but I'm familiar with like the
the
concept
concept,
and
yeah.
the
So
topic.
one of the they just showed clips of, like, people who practice martial arts up into their 80s doing the splits, and touching their forehead to the ground, or they're, able to kick really high or still move fast, or you see a guy in, I think it was, like, Singapore in his 70s, and he's doing, like, muscle ups and front levers on a pull-up bar, and so then I have friends I'm 28 right now, I have friends that sometimes say to me, it's like, "Man, I'm getting old, this pain, that, this, that." I don't know, there's a 70-year-old who looks better, feels better, moves better. And it just comes down to the decisions that you're making. And then the other thing I was gonna say too was, I imagine that, you were talking about your client, Paul, that making those lifestyle changes and all that stuff improved his golf game. I can't imagine that it was just that he yes, it's amazing to have, like, the ability to have a better quality of life, which is my favorite thing as a strength coach is to help people with those things. But then if you're talking sports performance, being a healthier person like you talked about, I'm sure it helped him tremendously.
Yeah, definitely. Because what happens in golf as people tend to get a little bit older is that their
Mhm,
physical capabilities decline much faster than their
mhm,
skill level. And
mhm,
they end up being blended together. But like there's no really good reason why your performance should massively drop off as you get older in golf, unless it's tied to your physical decline. And
mhm,
that's what tends to happen most people. So if
mhm,
you can do a really, really good job of maintaining your physical qualities,
mhm,
and depending on sort of what your training background has been and the level that you're coming from,
mhm,
you may be able to improve your physical capabilities from the age of 60 to 70 if you haven't been doing much. If you've been training really, really well, you might just be trying to maintain as best as possible. But
mhm,
that's what gives you the best chance of maintaining or improving your golf level as you get older.
mhm,
100%. Like, is its physical capability limited? The skill element of it. Now, I know there's structural changes to the brain as we get older that make it a little bit more difficult, but they're pretty closely linked to the physical
yep,
changes as well. Yeah, like that really is one of the big pillars for long term golf performance is how
mhm,
good a shape you're in. Like if you take let's say the top subset of golfers in there, let's say from under 40 to over 70, I think it would be pretty clear what the big
uh-huh,
determining factor is. Like they'd be in vastly different physical capabilities. I'm not saying 70-year-olds should be like 40-year-olds, but you want to
for
try
sure.
and stay as close to that level as you can, and training is the only way to do it.
I think, going along that as well, there's this, talk about, like, training for longevity versus training for performance, and I think that it's kind of a dumb argument because I think training for performance is training for longevity.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Usually if somebody has said that they've changed their focus in training to training for longevity, they've
uh-huh,
usually started training way easier and they
mhm,
will age faster,
mhm.
for
Yeah, it's
sure.
less intensity, but then another thing is you talk about how, well, not you, just in general, this it's known within our space that people lose speed almost twice as fast as they lose strength, and so if you think, "Okay, I'm gonna do this performance program, and now it's okay to jump and to throw and to do things at high velocities, but if I'm doing, a longevity program, I just have to do maybe a little bit of balance and bird dogs and stuff like
Exactly.
that,"
Bad
then
idea.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, so
So like
that's
training 100% needs to be scaled to the level the
uh-huh,
person is at. Like I
uh-huh,
know I don't need to tell you that. But with that being said, you still need as quickly as possible to try and get everybody to the level where they can tick off the main boxes. So like mobility, pretty much everyone can train. Sort of speed/rate of force development. I think pretty much everybody can train it. How they do it might need to be a little bit
for
different.
sure.
For example, you can give the 25-year-old just out of college like the rebound jumps to work on his lower body power.
Mhm,
The 75-year-old with a knee replacement, like he might be doing kettlebell swings or fast like stand-ups from sitting on a box or something like
mhm,
that, getting
mhm,
started with the same principle of what they're working on in mind. And then
mhm,
everyone can work on strength. You just scale it to the person. And they're the ones I would say are like really important for sort of golf performance, mobility, power, strength. You're
mhm,
dead right. Like power drops off much more quickly
mhm,
than strength. What's interesting on that, like, I think so. Biology is one reason why this happens. Like, but the other thing is that, like, basically nobody trains anything fast or explosive
mhm.
as they get older. Whereas they might have to do some strength based activities even as part of their daily
Picking up
lives.
a package.
Yeah, so like I'd be curious, like for people who actually like maintain their training as they get older, how much that gap would be decreased.
Mhm,
I'm sure that there would still be like a difference, and the power is what would drop off faster. But I think it could be maintained a lot better and a lot
mhm,
closer to the rate strength drops off on with good training. And then the other one that we were going to get into, like for just long term health, keeping your cardiovascular system
mhm,
in good shape. For golf performance, like there's nothing special type of like protocols or requirements that are necessary for golf. Like golf is basically slow walking with lots of breaks in between. So, you don't need to be super, super fit, but keeping your heart and lungs healthy, is
mhm.
just It's basically like your baseline health, you know,
Mhm,
your heart rate, your blood pressure, your metabolic health, all these things are largely dependent on your cardiovascular fitness. So yeah, people should be working on it as much as they can, basically. And if that's really bad, it makes it really hard to work on any of the other stuff because
mhm.
you'll tire so easily and you'll be in such bad general shape that it will be really hard to train the other areas to any high level.
Mhm. So I want to go in two directions with that. I want to talk about. I found what you said very interesting as to a potential reason as to why people lose speed faster is because it's just less demanded of an attribute in life. I think there's a statistic that said 90% of people over the age of 30 never sprint again, like a day
Yeah.
in their entire lives, which
Or
is
jump
remarkable.
or
Yeah,
throw,
or
you
jumper.
know?
Yeah, yeah. But if we were cavemen and we're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger every single day, you might find people don't have their speed decline as quickly as it does today. I know that's a kind of foolish example, but then as far as the cardio thing, clients for specifically, because if it's another sport, if you're a wrestler and your cardio is bad, like you're gonna really suffer. So I have some sports where people really do take conditioning into consideration. Like golf, for example, people really just care about, can I get the mobility and can I get the power? I try to tell them that strength is the foundation for power, and can also train speed. But then cardio, like you said, helps them in the weight room. If you get gassed out, just doing basic exercise and all that stuff, it can allow you to get more density within a session. If you're trying to accumulate more volume or to take shorter breaks or to not feel gassed out intraset. But then also, like, yeah, I'm trying to tell them, it's like, sorry that I care about your heart and lungs.
Yeah.
So they'll always tell me something like, "Oh, well, we'll just walk 18, that'll be our cardio," and it's nice because to me, I think getting your steps in is a good entry point, and walking 18 is not nothing, especially if you carry your bags, but it is something that I find it's almost like pulling teeth. I can't write a program for them without rotation, in the sense that they need to do, like, a Banner cable rotation and a med ball throw, but also giving them the cardio side of things is like,
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, it's just something that like is just kind of important for everyone. It's just one of those things like if we're trying to tell ourselves that we're interested in long-term health and fitness and
Mhm.
you're not doing a reasonable amount of cardiovascular exercise, you're not really serious about what you're talking about, basically.
I think the statistics show as well that one of the biggest indicators for longevity, for lack of better words, is cardiovascular fitness more than strength. Strength is obviously very important, but I think they said VO2 max has like one of the highest correlations with longevity.
Yeah, like basically, like from a fitness measurement standpoint,
Mhm.
those like cardiovascular fitness, which they often measure with VO2 max, like there's nothing special about VO2 max. It's just a way of measuring fitness. If you
Sure.
measured how quickly someone could cover, 3 miles or 5 miles or an equivalent on a bike or rower
Mhm.
or whatever, same thing. Like it's just measuring
Uh-huh.
how fit you are. Uh, and then strength. They're
Mhm.
the two big ones, like cardiovascular fitness, muscle strength. People might argue, well, muscle power is actually a better predictor. Nobody who is very strong isn't powerful enough for everyday life, you know?
Mhm.
And the other thing is like by training for a high level of strength,
Mhm.
you're also almost certainly going to keep a high level of muscle mass, which is
Mhm.
really important for your metabolic health.
Mhm.
So like from a body composition standpoint, strength training ticks a lot of those boxes. So yeah,
Bone density too, I imagine, just from the
yeah,
stress.
exactly. So like they're the main two buckets like that people should be filling. If you can work on continually getting aerobically fitter and
Mhm.
you can work on continually getting stronger or maintaining as well as you can as you face the inevitable decline, they're the big things that really move the needle. And then for sports, like if you also are interested in a sport, like we're talking about golf, on top of that, practice your skill a lot, become a master at the craft,
Mhm.
basically.
We don't have to go down this topic necessarily, but there's this big debate about hybrid athletes because it's typically seen as people who focus on high levels of cardiovascular fitness and then also high levels of strength. But some people are saying, well, what if it's two different physical attributes? Can you still be a hybrid athlete? And then some people say, oh, you're maybe just a capacity warrior, but you're not an athlete if you're not practicing the skill sides. I just think it's interesting that you're talking about strength conditioning and skill, but to me, that's just good training for sports is practice your skill and then do your strength conditioning.
Yeah. So the
And,
hybrid athlete label, I don't
uh-huh.
know when I saw it for the first time, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, like people have been combining running and lifting weights in their training programs for a very long time. You
Yeah,
know, like I don't know where that's just like fitness enthusiasts, you know.
sure, sure.
So I don't know how that blew up so much, but yeah, I
Mhm,
think it's a good idea. Like
mhm,
try and lift weights and do cardiovascular exercise regularly.
mhm.
Like try and be good at both of them.
I don't wanna take too much of your time, but I just got a couple rapid fire questions if you
Yeah,
have
no
too
problem.
much, okay.
Take your time.
Um, so what is something that you've changed your mind on recently or during your career? And then is there anything that you're curious about learning about now? Something that you're maybe on the cusp of changing your mind about?
Yeah, so like probably especially with higher level golfers, like pros, when I started working with them, I
Mhm,
probably thought that like getting stronger would have a bigger immediate effect on their
mhm,
club head speed,
mhm,
which it mostly did, but not always, and probably not as dramatic as I thought.
mhm,
Um, so while I still focus on it now, if a PGA Tour player contacts me to talk about gaining club head speed, I'm much more interested to know what they're specifically doing to work on their club head speed from
mhm,
like more of direct training, that skill standpoint. So are they hitting 25 balls 3 times a week with a radar for feedback,
mhm,
logging their results, trying to make that going up?
mhm,
Whereas before, like I would have been more interested right away, probably in like what they were doing in their gym work. They're
mhm,
both very important for sure, but I think like where I've put the emphasis has probably changed. And then what I'm curious about looking into more, it's a tough one to say, to be honest. Like it's definitely in golf, it's less with training, but like definitely getting more interested into like long-term skill development. And
okay,
it's solely just a reflection on kind of my own like golf game, I guess. So like I've been a like scratch to +2 handicap for about 5 years. Was in my late 20s. I'd never gotten better than five. So
mhm,
like I made a big jump to scratch to +2, but like it's really difficult with say like the time constraints that I have now and just the diminishing returns on how good you can get at golf to try and keep improving. So yeah, like digging deeper into like how you can go from, let's say, good to like very good or you
mhm,
know like very good to great or whatever way you want to look at that. But yeah, like that's kind of where I'm more interested from a personal standpoint now is like the later stages of like skill development when it's already gotten hard. It's pretty easy
okay,
when you've a lot of low hanging fruit.
mhm,
But yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. To be perfectly honest, like I can't think of anything training wise. Like
mhm,
I've not that I don't continue to try and learn or
sure,
like read up on things. I don't have a particular thing in training now where I'm like this is the thing, you know. Probably the like one thing I would say on that is the longer I've been in training for sports
mhm,
performance, like what I've seen a lot of is whatever you're trying to get really good at. This sounds like so obvious that it might kind of sound stupid, but I think it's true.
mhm,
The more of the thing you're trying to get better at that you can do at a high level of
mhm,
effort and intensity without getting set back from being injured, the more progress you'll make. So
mhm,
like rather than thinking about the things you can do that might help the sporting task or output driven task you're trying to improve, try and do more of it.
mhm,
So like if you're trying to improve your sprint times, see how much sprinting you can
mhm,
build into your week or your month
mhm,
at a high output with good recovery without getting injured. If you're trying to improve your club head speed, like let's make swinging the
mhm,
focus, you know, whereas before I think I would have been more like, I wonder what the best like program in the gym to do to support this is, which I still think is very important,
mhm,
but definitely like the specific adaptations to
mhm,
whatever you're trying to get really good at
mhm.
are very important.
Yeah, the law of specificity. I think it's interesting because, there's that, like, bell curve meme where people do the right thing with little knowledge, and they get a little bit of knowledge, and then they overcomplicate training, and then they get, like, the top 5% of knowledge or whatever, and they start doing the things they did in the beginning. They just went around the circle, and they're better for it in that sense.
So like this is one of the things that I think social media has hurt
Mhm,
us with,
mhm,
especially like probably Instagram, is unnecessarily adding complexity
mhm,
because it's a unique selling point
mhm,
and almost either people tricking themselves or others into like this might be necessary to get better at what we're trying to do.
mhm,
Whereas like almost any time you look at someone who's gotten to a very high level of whatever it is, they've had probably decades of trying to specifically get better at this thing. Like their
mhm,
best shot putter of all time is currently competing. His name is Ryan Krauser. He's won
mhm,
gold in the last three Olympics. He's obviously a master technician in the shot put, and he's also a complete monster. In the
Yeah.
gym, he's like 6'8" and 320 pounds or something like
Mhm.
that. And he did a Q&A on Instagram maybe a year or so ago or whatever. And someone asked him, like, what do you think is the most, like, what exercise has been most important to you for your success? And his reply was like 20 plus years of throwing,
Yeah.
so like just constantly trying to throw the thing further, like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're doing the supporting stuff in the background, but like isolate the thing that you're trying to get better at and do a lot of it. Feedback with high intent is important. Sounds obvious,
Um,
but a lot of people skimp around it. I get questions from so many people, like not happy with my club head speed. I'm trying to go
mhm.
from 105 to 112. What do you think of my program? And I read through their program and I'm like, they're not doing any swings. Like,
Yeah.
they've sent me their 4-day workout split, and they're asking me if I think they should do front squats or back squats, or should they do dumbbell bench or flat bench. And I'm like,
Mhm.
you're not swinging. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter, like, if you do a front squat or a back squat, or if you do barbell or dumbbell bench, like, because the adaptations you can get from that are the same. But like, in a month, you're not doing any swings where you're trying to swing as fast as you can. You should be
Uh,
doing like 150, or
yeah,
300.
it's like a sprinter who would only do, like, joint angle specific stuff and accommodating resistance and all these fancy methods, but then never touch a track. Just doesn't
100%.
make any sense. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And that's become more common for definite, because people have kind of learned a little bit about like sports performance training, S&C,
Mhm.
and it's like almost all S&C programs have been derived from strength sports, which isn't the end of the world in a certain extent, but like they have to be combined with like prioritizing practicing the skill
Mhm.
you're trying to develop a very high output in.
Is there any major misconception in the golf space that you wish to dispel?
Yeah, like that your exercises need to resemble the golf swing for it to
Okay.
be beneficial for golfers. I would say that is probably the main one. That
Uh,
that or that, weightlifting is gonna make you tight and
Bulky. Yeah, you
inflexible.
can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I find that I get my best mobility gains from, like, loaded mobility, for example, like, if I do a Search or Jefferson, my hamstrings feel a lot better than if I just try to reach my toes with no weight whatsoever,
Yeah.
and I feel like I get more resilient in those, positions anyway,
Yeah. I'm
so
almost
then
20 years into pretty good resistance training, and I'm
mhm,
still not breaking 175 pounds body weight. So I
uh-huh.
think the fear of getting too bulky is probably, overemphasized for most. And it's definitely not happening in your 8-week program.
I make the joke, I have female clients that say they, like, don't wanna lift heavy because they wanna get bulky, and it's like, "Yeah, I didn't wanna get my license because I don't wanna turn into, Lewis Hamilton or something like that."
Yeah.
It's like, if only it were that easy. Is there any positive change you're noticing in the golf, strength and conditioning space?
Yeah, I think more people are realizing like how important physical capabilities are for golf.
Mhm,
For definite, it's
mhm,
becoming much more popular. Like, if it like I don't think 15, 20 years ago I'd be able to have an app that golfers are subscribing to try and
mhm,
help them with their physical conditioning for golf.
mhm.
Yeah, just more awareness around how taxing, I suppose, a physical task swinging a golf club at a high level is.
It also helps when you see your Tiger Woods and your, Rory McIlroys, like, training like monsters in the gym and all that
Yeah,
stuff,
definitely. Yeah.
they wanna mimic their legends, and then if you could give any advice to somebody on anything, just completely general, doesn't have to be golf specific, strength conditioning specific, is there any one piece of advice you wanna give?
Exercise daily.
Yeah. And then final question, this is my favorite question I like to ask people, what feels like a touchdown or, like, just a win, a hole in one will be specific to golf. What feels like a hole in one in your job?
Definitely getting emails from app subscribers just
Mhm,
telling me that they subscribe to the app, they've been using it for X number of weeks or months, and they've noticed, big improvements in how they feel on and off the course. Particularly if it's someone that like had been struggling with an injury that was, causing them frustration, and that is cleared up, and they're just
mhm,
much happier and able to stop paying for treatments, medication,
mhm.
and they're able to enjoy their life on and off the course more.
So, yeah, I just wanna give you the opportunity to, plug Fit for Golf and your social media and all that, your program and your social media, but or anything else you'd like to plug. But before that, I just wanna say, like, a special thank you. Not everybody responds to DMs. I am in a small town. I don't have a lot of trainers nearby. I'm a solo entrepreneur, so it's just me. My wife is my sounding board, and she doesn't love the training space, so she tolerates it more than anything. So, it's really nice to be able to meet people like you over social media and for you to take time to respond and to help. whether it's through the app or just messages or something like that. I'm very appreciative of that, so I just wanna say thank you.
Yeah, my
And then, yeah,
pleasure.
if you wanna plug yourself or anything, please do.
Yeah, so if anyone is interested in the app, they can just go to the App Store, search Fit for Golf, and download it there. There's a 7-day free trial, so gives you a chance to try it out, no strings attached. And then on social media, it's fit underscore four, FOR underscore golf on Twitter and Instagram.
Have you considered changing the 4 to 4, like the golf 4?
I think someone already has it.
Okay.
So it's just too far
Yeah,
along
confusing.
now, it's more confusing too, yeah,
Sure,
because
sure.
if you're telling someone it's fit for golf and then they're typing it
Hit
in,
4
they're
golf,
probably
yeah,
not going to type a number.
sure. Well, I wanna thank you, very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on, Matthew. And yeah, wish you all the best. Thank you.
Cool, thanks.